The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning on the East Coast and good early morning on the West Coast. Thanks everyone for attending RAPA's May 12th Service-Oriented IT e-learning session. Today we're focusing on IT financial management and we'll jump right in. Webinar format continues as always, a panelist discussion related to today's topic. So we're going to be looking at the differences between, corporate finance, IT finance, and all the things that relate to managing the financial information within IT. I won't say much more than that, take away from the other slides. In terms of our panelists today, Pierre.
Yes, my name is Pierre Paquette. I'm the CTO here at RAPA Consulting. My background is in the technology area, obviously CTO, and also in the software development space. In the past several years, helping clients get the most out of the technology they deploy, specifically in the IT and ITSM space.
My name is Susan Odell, COO at RAPA, and my responsibility is as business lead for the organization. Depth of experience in the enterprise software space, but my focus for RAPA is really making sure that the strategic plans of our clients and of RAPA are front and center, and collaboration and those types of efforts around the services that we deliver. Richard.
And I'm Richard Evock. I'm the IT Service Management Lead at RAPA. Been doing IT Service Management related work for the last 15 years or so. My work is really between the technology and the process, and trying to make sure that everything kind of comes together into an organized way of doing things. So for that, a lot of emphasis on IT Service Management, ITIL. So I've been looking at this for a while, and Pierre and I have some very, how can we say, matching skills or skills that work well together, let's say.
What about me, Richard? That's not fair.
Oh, I forgot you. Yeah, so I'm process, Pierre's technical, and Sue is business, and we're together make a lot of sense.
There you go. Excellent. Okay, so just to review, and we just want to make sure that you're all aware that this is number 5 in a series of 11 related e-learning sessions on service-oriented IT. So would encourage you to visit our video page. There are many videos there, but in particular you can go and look at all of the previous sessions to today's on our website. As mentioned, today's focus is on IT financial management. And so on that basis, let's just turn to a review of the definitions of ITIL from an ITIL perspective. And Richard, I'll hand that over to you.
Okay. So, ITIL from the very start has put emphasis on IT financial management. The intent is really to say that, you need a process that is responsible for managing your IT budget, your accounting, and potentially charging if you're going down that path. And ultimately, the end is to ensure that you have the appropriate level of funding to provide the services that the organization needs. Of course, these are very general statements. They don't, they're not very specific. They kind of talk about, general accounting needs, but really IT needs to understand a lot more than what corporate accounting will give us, and that's, I think, will be something that will come across throughout the rest of the presentation is that very fact. IT financial management is a separate beast from the standard corporate accounting view of things.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I mean, we've seen that in a lot of cases, IT organizations default back to corporate finance to keep track of information that they are interested in. It's really a different point of view, a different focus when you're in corporate finance than if you are in IT specifically. We've seen areas of detail being omitted, not being kept track of at the corporate level, which are really crucial at the IT level. So it's just the realization that there are different goals from a corporate finance and then from an IT finance. Yes, we're talking about dollars and costs and budgets,
yeah.
But at the IT level, we're really looking at things from IT's point of view, not from a corporate point of view.
Right. Round peg, square hole type of a situation. There are still shapes, but they're different, and we have to treat them differently.
Yep.
Okay, so let's get into a little bit of the detail here in terms of the IT financial management mandate. There's a lot going on in IT financial management, and the role of ITFM is to make sense of information from the budget that is available and distributed amongst IT and even service centers or cost centers that might have their own ability to buy directly through to the procurement cycle. How things are allocated once procured, and then how are you charging. So maybe we could just talk about the three categories of costs and how that all comes into play. Pierre?
Yeah, when we're, for me, from a more technical point of view, we're talking about those raw procured costs, about things that we're purchasing, and we're talking about technology, we're talking about those costs related to technology. There are, those direct costs, those raw costs, and in a lot of cases the technology rolls up into the services or into capabilities that IT is providing. So making that the link between those raw costs all the way up to the service costs is kind of where that gray cloud is in the middle. What we often forget, or when we talk costs, is those different types of costs. Yes, we have costs for physical CIs, but we do have all those other costs that happen within an IT department. So HR being a big one in there, the cost of separate projects and just getting services off the ground. How we acquire costs from external services, and from an IT point of view, again, the IT is a steward of that service. So again, they need to be aware of those external service costs as well, and shield and the end user, the client, from how the service is being provided or delivered. And we talked a little bit about this in our last series, that it's that level of abstraction, and it plays here as well in terms of costs.
Yeah, one of the it's interesting that we have like this progressive from raw to categorized to client, because the first step of even getting the raw costs is not as trivial as it seems. I mean, these costs are in many different systems. They're categorized and captured many different ways, and as I think stated on the right hand side, I mean, some of these costs are actually not even taken on by IT directly, but taken on by clients who go out and buy their own software, hardware, but ultimately they're all part of the IT service that needs to be delivered. So the first step for any organization is to try to even understand, do I have all my costs? Then, as we said, obviously then we need to start categorizing them. How do we break them down? Where do these costs come from? How can we make sense of these? And ultimately, because we want to be a service-oriented IT service provider, we need to somehow attribute these costs to the right services if we're going to ever think about doing, cost recovery or chargeback. Because obviously, if the minute I open the Pandora box of charging back to my clients, they will want proof that the cost that they are being charged is related to reality. That it's not just something that someone dreamed up in an IT financial management office somewhere. So it's a progressive thing, and sometimes IT wants to start right at the end of business service cost, but if the stuff is not there underneath, it just won't get anywhere.
So that brings up a really good point of looking at financial management, IT financial management, as a holistic practice, not just as a tactical collection of cost data that gets filed into a report. There's cross-functional collaboration that has to happen here. There's processes from multiple teams in order to make sure that you're getting the information when you need it, and that it's accurate, and that people are participating and reporting correctly. Even from an HR point of view, and Richard, do you want to talk a little bit about that project we worked on where there was a gap in how people were reporting their time, what they were working on? I think we're going to talk about that a little bit on the activity side of things, but there's a lot that has to go on and a lot that needs to be considered when you're talking about the IT financial management practice.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we're saying that, we're showing here that that HR is the biggest cost, and it's actually a very difficult cost to start attributing, because the way, HR captures its cost is sometimes completely different than, the service we end up delivering. Usually projects are really good at, doing timesheets and, attributing, hours to specific activities. But when, the project goes out of the picture and things become operational, it's no longer that easy to actually be able to say, these HR costs are actually to support that service versus this one. So there's a big discrepancy there. And even when you actually try to, implement or install like a timesheet kind of discipline into the operational world, there's still gaps. I mean, it's just, there are certain roles where it's almost impossible to say, I spent an hour on this service versus that service. So that's a huge gap, and it's a huge gap on your biggest cost item, which is human resources. So there's a lot of things that need to be taken into account. But the first thing is the realization that, the way we capture HR costs never aligns with the business services easily, because usually HR is aligned to organization and, cost centers within that organization.
Yeah.
I think that's really the biggest challenge, is to understand the costs that are in play and how they are distributed, allocated to what you're doing in IT. To me, any project that would be to figure out what IT is spending, or what the costs are of delivering the services within IT, that is one of the big steps, is not only to identify what the costs are, but then to identify how they impact the end service, and not necessarily the activity or not necessarily the technology. And then only at that point are you able to understand what the costs are. So defining chargeback is maybe the next step after that. So, and you brought up a good point earlier, that often chargeback is the first thing that that IT departments want to do, is, okay, I have a budget and I need to charge it back because I want to account for the budget I have, without thinking that, yes, it impacts the client and they're going to want to see proof of what they're paying for. And again, it depends on the organization if they do want to get to that level, but definitely logically, that's what you want to do, is attribute, the charges you're charging to the costs that the dollars you're spending.
Just one. Go ahead, Richard.
Okay, I just wanted to say, just to go back to the HR, because something occurred to me. There's this tendency, and I've seen it in many clients, this tendency of thinking, doing timesheets will be the silver bullet, but with the timesheet thing for operational folks has to be really thought through, because if there's no incentive reason for them to be doing this, you will get pretty bad data. I mean, honestly, I've seen operational folks just doing their timesheets once a month and kind of just guessing what they did in the last month. So obviously, level of accuracy there would be minimal. But that has to be really well thought through. Timesheets are not a silver bullet in their own right.
So the other point I wanted to make, actually for you, Pierre, to just expand on a bit, is a comment in the orange box about the difference between IT financial management and corporate finance systems in terms of the change in the financial information related to IT assets.
Yeah, because the corporate finance often operates in a silo, and then they're also looked at for information around the assets and around what IT owns and what they're using. It's important that they don't operate in a silo, that there is some exchange, some collaboration between IT and corporate finance. For the obvious reasons are the money they are spending to acquire infrastructure and acquire technology. often is tracked differently at a corporate level than it is at the IT detail level. And so, keeping track of the lifespan of an asset or how it's amortized from a corporate point of view, I mean, it's important, but that exchange of information is also important, so that we know that assets are still being used at the technology level and are still being accounted for at the corporate finance level. So it's that level in between that seems to be not as clear and not as defined in organizations, and that's often a struggle. The whole procurement process originally, it supports corporate finance. Obviously, that's where the money is coming from. But the procurement process also has to be aware of, what the outcomes are, what you are acquiring, and that level of granularity is often missing. Also, I mean, you're trying to account for software that you've purchased, but the license information is not quite clear in terms of what you purchased, because the focus at the corporate level isn't as granular as the focus needs to be at the IT level and at the using of the software, the entitlements themselves. So some organizations have purchases of software and there's a large dollar amount at the end of the procurement process, but how does that break down into what's maintenance and support, what's entitlements, what's upgrades, and so on. So from a software point of view, it's just one case or one example. The same applies to hardware and to service contracts and whatever else IT acquires to provide the services. So that relationship, again, to me that's always the point that I always focus on, is the data itself that you have and how it relates back to proving that the entitlements are there in the case of software, and the assets themselves and the value of the assets. So all those costs, IT financial management, it's got so many different layers to it, from defining where the services are, how the services are costed, they're charged back into everything else. It's very complex.
Terrific. Okay, let's look for a minute at cost information. Pierre and Richard, I'll just leave this to you, please.
Okay, well, I can start. Basically, as we said, there's many sources of cost information. They come from various systems, various captured in various ways. But in the end, we need to have like a core set of data in order to be able to process the information. And this slide really represents, like at a very high level, what that core set of information would have to be. So, a portion which is about identifying the cost, so what service it relates to, what system. If we go back to our talk about configuration management, that's where the system comes in. Project, if project is there, accountant, cost center. Then after that, it's the actual cost detail itself. What does that cost entail? In amounts, hours, the lifespan of the cost. I mean, is that like a recurring cost, and how long, or the lifespan actually, in this case, of the item you purchased, if it's something that you'll be amortizing over a period of time. And then obviously, in the end, we also actually need the, the source where this data came from, so that we actually are able to go back and understand or prove that this is an actual cost. So this is really about just showing like a general description of what the course information is. Pierre?
Yeah, and if you look at these, they seem pretty logical, pretty straightforward, and in a lot of cases organizations do track all these different attributes to cost already. What we've seen is that, I guess, the discipline and the relationship between the information is what's missing. The collaboration between, what is a cost center versus what is a project, what is a system, what is a service, what's a GL account. I mean, those 5 attributes under cost identification come from 5 different areas, and if the collaboration between those areas is not there, then the information's accuracy or validity diminishes. So one of the key points that we see is that collaboration to make sure that we're all under agreement of what a service is versus a system, a project, and a GL and a cost center. Once we start getting into the more specifics of dollar amounts and years, start dates and end dates, I mean, those are equally important, but often, the identification and the source of system and the interpretation is not always there. And as I mentioned, these are things that organizations, this is information organizations keeps track of. And then they're using tools out there to try and make sense of the relationship of that data. So they'll use some BI tools to roll up some information and to give you a sense of what a service costs. And then it always does boil down to what's your definition of service and how closely are you managing the service. In our previous, just thinking back to the previous the webinar we put together, we talked about services and systems, and it's really, what have you defined as your service? And again, it's a point of view, right? So it's to define that, what are we talking about, in terms of rolling things up.
Okay, I'm going to move on to the next slide. As always, we have a lot to say about these topics, so we have to be cognizant of our 8 minutes that we have left on the call today. So this next slide is something that we run into all the time. People, I would say, generally are a little bit more familiar with activity-based costing as a concept than service-based costing. So Richard, if you could just take us through an explanation of the difference.
Yeah, well, I mean, really, what this slide is showing, activity-based costing is about, determining, activities that, the organization does, and then linking costing to that. The thing is making the jump between, the activities and the services that you ultimately deliver is not an easy one to do, because activities are really more focused on the inner workings of the organization, whereas the service is about what we're actually delivering in the end. And so many activities come together to ultimately provide a service. So what this slide is showing is that, the two do work together, but it's, as Pierre mentioned in the previous slide, it's about building the relationship between the different things where things become complicated. Because a service-based costing, I need to understand the activity, but I also need to understand some of the, the costs that are not necessarily linked to activities, about, getting services from the outside, about, assets being purchased, sometimes even purchased by the client. So to get the real service cost, I need to get, all of this information plus. So it's really about bringing the two together. They're not competing ways of looking at things. I think they are really complementary, but it's just that the activity-based costing has to be planned to align with what you would want to do from a service-based costing perspective.
Richard, I have a question for you. Just for point of clarification for those attending today and watching the video, is activity, does it equal human effort, or can activity be things other than pure HR resource time?
It can be more. I mean, your activities would be, the HR side, but also what you need to perform those activities. Now, where it becomes unclear is what you do for, so if we take an example, if we're doing server management as an activity, well, there's the HR part of doing server management, there's the tools you need to do server management, but are the servers themselves considered part of that activity or not? And that's where sometimes it becomes great. I mean, if you're doing full-out activity-based costing and you have to cover all your costs, they should be in there, but does it really make sense that, those 72 servers are part of the activity of server management or not? And that's where it becomes, I mean, it devils in the details, basically.
Yeah, the actual costing model and the complexity of the costing model will help you understand the information you're looking at. I know in the simplest case, at one end of the spectrum is IT has a budget, and that's the budget that they're using to provide the services, and that's at a high level. And obviously, that's not good enough because there's no transparency. how far do you go into the model of doing, your cost to services or your cost to activities, or maybe it's a blended model of cost to activities and then using ratios of those activities to the actual technology to provide the service. And I mean, there's so many different ways this can go, and then the outcomes are really what you want to be able to make decisions on. So the model and the complexity of the model is key. Making a model too complex becomes impossible to manage and to keep and to keep up to date. And having a model that's not complex, well, you can't do anything with the outcomes. And in the case of I have a dollar number to provide a service. So it really then becomes a balancing act of determining what model you want to subscribe to, and understand where the pitfalls are and where the advantages are as well, but also the pitfalls of saying, okay, this is the model and this is the information I get back, but there's still a kind of a grain of salt that needs to be taken with it to say, okay, how accurate is this, and is it good enough for me to make business decisions?
Yeah, certainly it's a true balancing act.
One of those business decisions that we've encountered has always been, do I go to a cloud service as opposed to an on-prem service? And that really then becomes the difficulty. And in a lot of cases, that's the catalyst to actually doing financial management, is to understand what the cost of the service is, so then they can compare it to services that are offered in the cloud. But that's the area of concern, is that often costs are not taken into account. They move services to the cloud, and then all of a sudden, they realize that, well, maybe that cost wasn't as much, and or I'm not getting the same level of service, or so on. So there's definitely some work that has to be done in this area to better use the information to make those kinds of decisions.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, great discussion. So takeaways. Let's just go through these one at a time. And the first one's, I think, through the session today, it's quite clear that IT financial management is complex and should be approached progressively. So, we always talk about in any of these IT practices, how are your initiatives aligned with the strategic goals of IT? So that applies equally to IT financial management. What is it you need to accomplish, and so what should you focus on within this particular practice itself?
Yep. No, certainly, and it's about establishing the right base. I mean, you can't do miracles with incomplete or inaccurate data. I mean, you have to establish the right base there. So, and that's a big job in itself.
And the second bullet, not forcing IT finance into a tool that it's not built for. Just everyone should accept that. Going into this ability, you know that your corporate finance system is an important tool in IT financial management, but it is not going to serve your purpose long term. So you need to plan around that fact and see what you can accomplish with your current tool set, which is a good deal. But in terms of your long-term strategy, there has to be something that's going to help you manage the more granular information. And as we pointed out, it's not just about one tool, it's about all those other feeders like your IT asset management system, your HR system, etc. The next point, looking at HR costs first, again, in most organizations, this represents a significant portion of their IT budget. So if you can work on that area of IT, you can certainly produce some return on investment for the business in that space. Richard, do you want to take the next one?
Yeah, which actually goes back to point number 2. It's really, you can't do IT financial management by relying on corporate finance practices, systems, and information. You definitely have to think about it in its own special way, and build it accordingly. The corporate finance may help, but in the end, it's IT's job to do this. The next one, and we mentioned that earlier, you can't realistically achieve charging without first understanding your true costs. And even as Pierre was mentioning, I mean, you shouldn't even really, see advantages in sourcing work if you don't really know what you're doing internally. I mean, you need to get that basis done. You need to understand your true costs. After that, you can make the right decisions. Before then, you're kind of you're guessing. And, obviously you need the information before you can actually go to the clients and show an invoice.
Yeah, understanding the true cost also, we haven't talked much about it in this session. We will in the subsequent sessions where we talk about understanding what you own and understanding how what you own is interrelated. So, understanding true cost is absolutely important, and also understanding what you own. Right? You can't manage if you don't know you own it, and therefore you can't cost it. So in the future series, we'll be talking more about those layers and the relationships between the service all the way down to the hardware, and that includes the people behind the scenes as well. So those relationships are important, and there's a definite level of collaboration within IT and with the organizations outside of IT as well. And we'll get into more of that detail in future sessions.
Yeah, and the last point is, IT financial management. It allows IT to show where the money goes. And I mean, in the current context, what we hear more and more today with our clients, there's a lot of pressure on IT to explain their costs, to show that they are actually contributing to the organization and where the money is going. And so IT financial management maybe in the past was not that important for many IT organizations because they would just ask for more money and get it. But in the current context, I think it's becoming an essential part of IT to do some true IT financial management.
Okay, so we're, I think, a minute over time here. Just to give you a highlight for our next session, we'll be moving, as Pierre just indicated, back into the IT component hierarchy, service asset and configuration management, and looking at hardware, software, and contracts and how those underpin service-oriented IT. So look forward to your participation on May 26th. And then if you have any feedback or outstanding questions on today's topic, if there's anything else you'd like us to cover in future sessions, please let us know at info@rapaconsulting.com. Wishing everyone a great balance of the week, and we'll see you in a few weeks. Thanks, Pierre. Thanks, Richard.
Thank you. See you guys.
Bye-bye.
See you.